Hi there folks, and welcome to part 2 of the boat projects below decks. And I thought we'd just precede that with a little bit of dolphin action as a wee antidote to the atrocious weather we're currently experiencing. So sit back, relax, enjoy.
He's on his back. Come up here, Jude. I think you might be right. I think that. Look at that. They're whistling before. No.
Okay, enough of that dolphin malarkey, and let's get back to some boat work. So, heading down the companionway, and you'll see our nice shiny sole boards, which we stripped back and recoated with urethane. Very shiny. Here's a picture of the galley, looking down the length of the boat through the saloon. One of the projects that we did in both heads was to remove the steel enamelled sinks and treat them for rust and recoat the enamel paint, and they too came up a wee treat as well. Back in the forepeak, and we renewed all the headlining, so replaced all the plywood panels and recoated them with a vinyl and foam liner. They came up okay if you don't look too closely. And in addition to that, we also did a little bit of extra joinery. There's a plywood step there below the berth that you can see. So just turning down and looking down towards the nav station, we did a number of upgrades around here. We put a 12 volt power supply in for USB power supplies. We swapped out the satellite phone for an Iridium Go. We remounted the stereo up on the board there, put the AI screen up there as well. Replaced the VHF radio, put a wee 12 volt switch panel, and above that you can see the Bitron battery monitor and also the wind generator power monitor when the wind generator is actually producing some power. And rotating round towards the galley and into the starboard quarter berth. We keep all our spares and bits and pieces there in that overhead locker. There's the grab bag. And down here is the new D240 Volvo Penta. which we've installed, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And a bit of an upgrade to the engine bay as well, which makes it a far more pleasant place to work in. So the boat originally came with an MD2040, had done 5,000 hours. As you can see, there's a fair bit of oil and corrosion, and I was a little bit uncertain as to the condition of the engine, so as a consequence elected there to pull the engine out and give it a bit of a Dulux overhaul, treat all the corrosion, give it a repaint and pop it back and see how it would run. As it happened, I mean, that whole process is actually relatively straightforward. And we lifted it out okay, shipped it up down to Christchurch, where I put it in the garage there and gave it a good thorough clean down. But the reality was there that the engine still burnt oil, dripped oil, and I was uncertain as to whether or not we're going to have ongoing problems with it. So elected in the end to replace the engine with a D240. So whilst the engine was out, gave the engine bay a thoroughly good clean and removed all the old sound insulation and relined it with nice new insulation with some improved lighting, and that made a hell of a difference to the accessibility and visibility within the engine bay. The old MD2040 though, despite all appearances, actually started and performed extraordinarily reliably. It always started first time and it never missed a beat, so it was a bit of a tough call there choosing to actually finally replace it. So we eventually bit the bullet and installed a new D240, and as you'll see in that shot, I had to open up the rear behind the engine in order to install the new sail drive. And here you can see a little bit of the joinery there to provide a cover plate there for the opening. Back to the galley and a little bit more joinery jobs. There's a bit of a Quila cutlery drawer. Has a bit of fun. Down under the sink, undertaken a few little jobs in here, just improve the plumbing so the sinks drain a little bit better, put a cover around the fridge compressor, replace the accumulator and the water pump, and upgraded the valving for the water maker controls. In regards to the water maker, that sits under the starboard quarter berth. You can see the two reverse osmosis filters. With the cat pump that's engine driven, we can produce around about 180 litres an hour. I modified the control panel to keep it as simple as possible. But it's all home built and works extraordinarily well. Here's a few shots there of when I pulled the filters out, just gave them an overhaul and replaced the RO filters. And a couple of the end plugs. Now mounting the cat pump to the engine was a little bit of a game, and I wanted a very substantial mounting there so it didn't vibrate around. So made that up and painted it Volvo green. Here's a bit of a shot there of the work there we're doing to install the brackets. Had to machine a new pulley up to mount on the front of the engine, and that all sat down there in the bay just above the starter battery. At the same time as I was doing this, I installed the Balmer 210 amp alternator on the D240. Down there below you can see the Mitsubishi 130 amp alternator that comes with the D240, so I kept that as a spare, but preferred to put the 210 amp alternator on. That's a bigger frame than the Mitsubishi alternator, so I've had to make a few adjustments there in order to fit it. And one of the key things I had to do was swap around one of the blocks there where the alternator mounts to below the engine mount instead of above it in order for it to fit. Also had to lift the coolant reservoir to clear the top of the alternator. So it's all a little bit of a palaver. And the other thing with mounting the water maker pump too is I had to modify the front panel on the engine cover. And you can see there where I'm just modifying that and making it out of nice hardwood plywood, but using some old plywood material there that I'd sort of cut out from elsewhere on the boat to match the veneer on the companionway. There's the new Balmer 210 amp. There you can see the original mounting for the Mitsubishi alternator. Here's a couple of shots of the components I had to make up in order to mount the new 210 amp alternator. Okay, and back into the port quarter berth. I've relocated the spare anchor so it makes it quite a nice sleeping companion to those sleeping down here. We end up using this as storage more than anything else, to be fair. We use the starboard quarter berth as our passage berth. Pumpkin and Christmas cake, most important. Down here in the corner there I've made a little bit of a separate passageway to the back of the VSR so you can check the connections on that. And inside the engine access you can see the Balmer alternator which just squeezes in just nicely. The reservoir, coolant reservoir has been lifted up. I've got an MC614 external regulator that sits in and under the quarter berth. I put a temperature indicator there so I can monitor the temperature of the engine bay. And here, looking at the front of the engine bay, you can see the filters there for the water maker. Coarse filter, 25 micron, 5 micron filters. And here's our beautiful D240 in all its glory. Down to the left there you'll see a cooling water flow switch that alarms there if there's no flow to the cooling water system. Still a spaghetti junction of wiring and tubes, but there's no real avoiding that with the space that we've got available, unfortunately. And now must be battery time. Here's the installation of the new Genesis batteries. Here's the old Trojan batteries. Solar panel connections and buses. I've fused the alternator input and the load output directly at the batteries. There's a shunt there for the battery monitor. Still looks a bit higgledy-pickledy, but it does work. Underneath the cupboard here and amongst the potatoes and pans are the solar panel MPPTs. I elected to put a single MPPT on each of the solar panels to maximise output. Down in the forward battery compartment, the old Trojan batteries didn't have a large box that was sealed, so I made one of those up. Plywood, fiberglass, paint, you know the drill. And popped the new Genesis batteries in and redid all the connections and tidied that up. And that about does it for all the major works there that we did below decks. And here's a nice shot of Amélie all set and ready to go. Anakiwa, beautiful day. And here I am walking down to the bay from our house, having just locked it up. And we'll be back in about 18 months' time. Happy days.